Quartermaster General is a game that I played in the past and I like very much. It is a remarkable game that allows you to play all of World War II at the strategic level, every theater, in a single evening, and relying on a core of rule which is very, very slim, especially when you compare it to the magnitude of the theme that is portrayed. Now we have a new implementation of the Quartermaster General system, and this time we have Quartermaster General the Cold War. This is a game that depicts, well, the history of the world, really, between the 1940s and the 1980s. It represents three factions, the Western Bloc, the Soviet Bloc, and non-aligned countries and political entities that are simply struggling, well, for dominance, or especially in the case of the non-aligned parties, for survival, really, to define themselves, to figure out how to become an independent country. So very interesting topic here, and one that is hard to capture given the complexity of the event. Of course, there is a precedent, Twilight Struggle, which is a great game. The Cold War, Quartermaster General, the Cold War has the advantage of being much simpler, much easier, and just like the original Quartermaster General, pretty much there aren't many rules that you have to worry about. A lot of work has been done for you by the designer in the design of the cards. The card decks are designed in such a way that the resources that you have, the challenges, the advantages that you have, simply based on the composition of your decks, will mirror the historical parties that you will control. That is to say, you don't have to worry too much about, oh, I need to follow those rules to play the Soviet party. The Soviet deck plays that way, and you cannot play differently. Oh, I need to follow that set of 20 rules to make sure that I play my non-aligned faction the way it's supposed to. Don't worry about it. The cards that you have will force you to play within a certain range of possibilities and challenges. So it's fun, and it's definitely remarkable that a lot of theme, a lot of chrome has been hardwired in the cards, and so you don't have to worry about making the thing come to life. The cards will do that for you. Without further ado, let me show you how Quartermaster the Cold War works. The game is played on this board here that represents, well, the whole world. This is the scope of the conflict that we're dealing with here. We have sea areas, we have land areas that are adjacent to one another if they share an edge, and of course the same applies to sea areas. These symbols that you see here, those are straits. That means that if the area where you see that symbol is not controlled by the enemy, then you can move from a sea area connected with an arrow to the other sea area connected by that arrow, as if they were adjacent. Of course, that applies to naval units like that. Same here, say if that space in Turkey is not occupied by my enemy, then I can move from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean with my naval units. You see these symbols here printed on the map? Those are supply sources, very important. You will place military units on the board during the game, and those units need to be in supply. That means they need to be able to trace a line of areas from where they are, leading to a supply source, and that line of areas need to be uncontested. This is important because, differently from previous Quartermaster General games, enemy pieces can't share a space, and when they do, the area counts as contested, and among other things, it cannot act as a supply source for either sides. As for the military units, there you see some land units, you already saw naval units actually, and then we also have air units. The land units can be on land, naval units in the sea. Air units can be in either position. They can be on land or they can be in the water, as long as they are together with a friendly piece. So air units cannot be alone. Like in that case, they always need a friend. Everybody needs a friend.
We have 3 blocks here. That means that the game in its, let's say, default state should be played by 3 players, each representing a block. We have the Western block, the Eastern block, and the non-aligned / independent block. Each block can be played by 1 or 2 players, though that means that the game can be played between 3 and 6 players. Now, we have red pieces for the Eastern block, blue pieces for the Western block, and then we have the non-aligned that represent a coalition of different forces. In fact, we have some yellow pieces that represent Chinese forces, we have orange pieces representing India, and then we have brown pieces representing nationalists. I think of them as independent partisans. They want to create their own nation, and they don't really care about much else. And what is important, what is unique about them is that the nationalist units do not need to trace supplies. Again, based on the fact, I suppose, that they represent local forces. The game is card-driven, and seriously so. That means that pretty much anything that happens in the game is determined by a card. Each block has a deck of cards. If only one player is playing that block, it's a single deck of cards. Otherwise, as you can see, the cards are 2 types as differentiated by the background, like red and dark red here, or for the Western block, blue and green. And so, if you are a single player playing the block, you shuffle all the cards in a single deck. Otherwise, you divide them in 2 decks, say blue and green, and assign them to 2 players that will have to work together. Players, or should say blocks, will alternate taking their turns. The game can last up to 19 turns, so we have a turn track here. And at the end of a turn, we simply move the turn marker there, and every other turn, starting from between turn 2 and turn 3, you will score. And scoring is based mainly on the number of units that you have on the board. You want a lot of those, plus occupation of supply sources, plus status cards. Those are cards that you play face up in front of you. They stay there until the end of the game, or at least until there is a game effect that removes them, but they do not have an expiration date included with them, and those status cards can also give you extra victory points. You will keep track of your victory points here on the board, and it may be that during the game there will be a block that will be more than 20 points ahead of the last player. That should not be. If at the end of one of those scoring rounds a block is 20 or more points ahead of the last player, then the block wins. Here we have 3 and 24. Oh my gosh, the Western block would win. If that is the case, actually the second player must land, or just give, actually, the in-game purposes, give points to the last player until the gap is reduced. If even that way the third player is still not within 20 points from the first player, then the first player on the score track wins the game immediately. Otherwise, if that doesn't happen, the game continues until the end of round 19, and at that point the player with the highest total of victory points is the winner of the game. But back to our cards. Remember, we're talking about those. The cards determine the turn structure. Each blocks will alternate taking turns, and when a block takes a turn, first there is the begin turn step, which is not something that necessarily means that you will do anything, but there are many game effects that are triggered during the begin turn step. So very often you will look forward to it. Hooray, now I get the advantage of whatever it is that I set up earlier. Then you have the air step, in which the active block may burn a card, may spend any card from their hand. You will have a hand of cards, many card to rebase an air unit. Also, there are cards that are air cards, and this is when you play them. And you can play those air cards if you can find them. There you go. You can play them to build a new air unit or to launch an airstrike. That means you can remove an enemy piece in the same area or in an adjacent area by simply declaring that you are launching an airstrike. Now you see this little symbol here. The little symbol here means that if you are playing this card for an airstrike, you are antagonizing the target. You're escalating conflict against the target. Suppose that the Soviets use this card against the Western powers. Now we look at this board, at this section of the board here, which is the escalation section. And we move a marker to keep track of pretty much how much escalation people cause. So if the Soviet used a card that had one symbol, one of those symbols, and used it against the Western blocks, then you move that way. Suppose that later the Soviets use a card that has two of those symbols, they use it against it on a line, you do this. Now the Western later play a card that has three of those symbols, they play it against the Soviet, they do that. Why is that important? Because there are cards, weapons of mass destruction, that are particularly powerful, and they have a penalty in terms of victory points that you have to pay unless the opponent has escalated enough against you. So this is a situation the West has escalated up to that point against the Soviets. Then there will be cards that the Soviets can now play without a penalty, and that would not be the case if the escalation level was lower. So what you do, what comes around goes around. What you do to them gives them a possibility to do bad stuff to you. But where were we? At the air step. So a turn has the begin turn step, then we have the air step, then we have the action step, which in a sense is the main step, which is where you can play a variety of cards. You can play status cards that simply will go face up in front of you and will give you a lasting effect, which is described there. You may launch a sea battle if there are naval units that you control in the same area as the naval units of the enemy. Then you play a sea battle card, and unless there are the game effects to affect the situation, you simply remove an enemy unit. Land battle works the same, but well, I think you guessed, land battle works on land. And again, if nothing else happens, you launch a land attack and you destroy a land unit in the same space where you are. Now the air units may start messing things around. That is, the target of the unit, instead of losing a land or a naval unit during a land or naval battle, if they have an air unit in the same space where the battle takes place or adjacent, they may choose to sacrifice the air unit instead of losing that. However, if you as the attacker also have an air unit next adjacent or in the same space, you may choose to pretty much sacrifice your air unit to deny their air coverage and therefore attack the original unit. I want to attack that unit, the Soviet places, but I'm defending it, but I am actually using my air power to remove this thing. It sounds like a big complicated thing, and of course this will need to be moved because now it doesn't have a land unit that allows it to stay where it was. Pretty much this is for land battle, but again, a lot of important things happen because of the status cards that really build an engine of resources, of things that you can do to score points. Then we have the supply step, in which you need to check that all units are in supply. Finally, we have the espionage step. Espionage cards are particularly powerful. During the espionage step, you need to discard a card from your hand. It can be anything. It's just you're just burning a resource, and then you prepare the espionage card. So you place it face down in front of you, and it's a one-time benefit, but usually really big benefit, and you will reveal it whenever the effect described on the card applies. You will reveal it and you will resolve it. So during the espionage step, you're simply preparing the card face down and you resolve it who knows when. So that's kind of the general idea. Oh, at the end of the turn, also very important, you draw cards, and it's important to remember that your deck is limited. Once the deck is empty, the deck is empty. You don't get to reshuffle the discard pile. you just remain without resources, you play as normal, but well, you won't be able to do much at that point. Also, at the beginning of the turn, if you want, you can discard cards, 3 cards from hand, to look for a specific card in your deck. Say maybe you want to look for a land battle or for a build army, which is how you bring units on the board. So at the beginning of your turn, you can also discard 3 cards to look for a specific card, but when you consider that your deck is limited, of course, that is an option that you may want to consider carefully.
Now, I like the original game very much. You may watch my video again if you haven't, and you may just remember how enthusiastic I was. Now, I still like Quartermaster General a lot, but after a while, after playing it more, and I would say in hindsight, the game now feels a little bit scripted. It is not a negative, really. If you play Quartermaster a couple of times a year, you won't have that problem. But it is true that simply because of the theme, if you're Japan, well, there's a certain sphere of influence that you have to respect. If you are another country, you move from there. Given that we are in World War II, it is perfectly fine that you're not projecting your agency everywhere around the world. However, it is true that then the choices are limited. I would almost say it's something that I didn't feel it was a problem because it fits the theme. It didn't feel like a limitation until, of course, I played the Cold War, where you are all over the place. You can go wherever the heck you want, and that is fascinating. You're freed from some of the limitations of geography, and you can just explore and go and spread in different ways. Actually, at least for the main blocks, the Western and the Eastern bloc, it is a big choice if you want to concentrate in a single space. Europe is very desirable. Chances are that at least for a while the 2 main blocks will play tug of war there, and Germany and Central Europe will switch sides constantly until maybe the players will think, yeah, but what if we actually spread out and we do some of those good old war by proxy? We start trying to go in different places, and then you have Vietnam, and then you have Cuba, and then you have different things that happen. So right there, the choice between concentration in key areas or spreading out is a very important one. And again, through the cards, through the game pieces, you can really go in all sorts of directions. And yet it still feels thematic precisely because, well, it fits the nature of the Cold War, as opposed to, generic war games like Risk, and all of a sudden, yeah, let's go to Australia, let's do this and do that. It feels very gamey. Here, you have the whole world at your disposal, and it is still a game that feels thematic and historical, because it does represent a geopolitical struggle, a military struggle that involved the whole planet. This being said, while the game is very thematic, it is not a simulation, of course, but it really works as a game, and it feels to me that it still has enough historical elements, again, to feel thematic, to give me the sense I'm playing a game about this theme. I'm even learning about a couple of things, not just about the theme, the content that is, what you see represented in the cards, but the dynamics. Again, if nothing else, why War by Proxy is so important. When Frontal War doesn't achieve anything, then you start figuring out how you can tip the balance by going in places that maybe per se don't really look that have a lot of strategic value, but again, they did historically and they will have in the game. I like how the 3 factions play different from one another. Replay value right there because you switch faction and you're playing the game very differently. The Soviets have considerable material power, and they're just brutally trying to steamroll over everybody. The Western Bloc has more political power, that is a more nuanced deck with different effects, with status effects, and with military effects. The non-aligned party is a fascinating one because when you start playing, you'll feel like the sucker of the competition. You feel like, what am I even doing? The non-aligned in the first couple of rounds, chances are will be behind and will need some help not to give the first player automatic victory. Because you don't have many game pieces, you're not doing much, you're controlling 2 or 3 areas, etc., etc. The non-aligned party, however, is in for the long game because they have a lot of status cards that takes time to play, but then create momentum. Then you don't control many areas, but those areas maybe will score you 2 points or 3 points each. And so while the Western and the Eastern Bloc, they're controlling a lot of areas that will give them a point each. Now the non-aligned are forming nations or creating independent areas, and each of them is going to score a lot. So it's interesting to see how the non-aligned party starts really slow at the risk of causing victory of the first for the first player, and then really gets momentum and catches up and has a really has a serious possibility for victory towards the end. But you have to build that engine of status cards. So that element is more important for the non-aligned player than for everybody else. So I like this. I like the dynamics. I like the theme. Gameplay is the gameplay that you know from the old Quartermaster General. There are a couple of extra rules, a couple of extra wrinkles because of the WNDs and because of the unique rules that apply to the non-aligned. But other than that, it's still simple, linear, streamlined, with a lot of interesting choices because you have so many things that you can do with these cards. And you will never have enough to do all that you want to do. So you have nice resources, you have hand management, you are reacting to what the opponent is doing, so you have the sense of like tactical back and forth. At the same time, you need to think about long term and building an engine of cards to give you advantages. So gameplay is very strong, the theme is very fun, replay value is high. I can only endorse Quartermaster General Core War with all of my enthusiasm. I love playing this game. I think it is really, really fun. I prefer it to the original Quartermaster General even because it has more variety in gameplay, because it doesn't feel like it has a script of there is one. It just can be played in so many different ways that I think gameplay is even more captivating and exciting than the original game. Quartermaster General The Cold War, absolutely an excellent game.